الرحمن الرحيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله وعلى أهل بيتك المظلومين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. مظلوم يا غريب كربلاء، سيدي يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز فوزا عظيما. In honor of Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam, please recite one resounding salawat. Allahumma salli. And in honor of Muslim ibn Aqil, the first martyr in defense of Imam al-Hussein, a second louder salawat. Allahumma salli. And in honor of the Imam of our time, Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan, a third loud salawat. The war in Gaza has been the center of attention and subject of discussion for the last 279 days. Tens of thousands of news articles have been written about it. Perhaps hundreds of thousands of hours have been dedicated to the media coverage of the event, discussing the various aspects pertaining to the war, its implications, its repercussions. However, I think it's the time to now examine the war through the lens of God and in light of the divine laws. Because I believe major divine laws are applicable to the war and the sides involved. Laws that are not acknowledged or understood by politicians, by security analysts, and by journalists and reporters that report the war. Because God is kind of removed from the equation. They either don't believe in God or don't believe that God has an active role in what's happening in the world. And when God is removed from the equation, anyone analyzing the war will have major blind spots and will have major miscalculations and will not be able to take into account the governing laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I believe that the war is a chance for us to try and familiarize ourselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with His divine qualities, and with the divine laws that govern the world. Yes, we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We believe in His qualities mentioned in the Quran as taught by the Prophet of Islam. But when you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala operating, Allah in action, that's a different story. This is why I believe that major incidents and events happen in our lives so we can take the lessons and strengthen our bond with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through the prism of God, when we examine this war, we will acknowledge God's power, God's ability to maneuver, and God's presence, and God's dominance, and God's intervention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not obsolete. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just relevant to us, but He's also dominant. Even if you deny the existence of God, you cannot deny the existence of a dominating force that is outside our realm of power. Otherwise, when you look at the people of Gaza, powerless, no money, no support, no media that supports them. Even the neighboring Arab countries are not with them. And I think that is something that we should cherish. Why? Because you could detect the presence of Allah when these people have failed to support the people in Gaza. These people have no one to support them, right? And they might be crushed. And we as believers can detect God's presence in the story. They could crush them. They've demolished the entire enclave. But we know that this is not the end of the story. Sayyidah Zainab said this in the courtyard of Yazid, not after gaining the support of the Muslims towards the end of the Umayyad dynasty. It was after all her brothers, all her family members were defeated ostensibly in the war. They were all killed. All the companions of her brother were also killed, while Yazid was leading an entire empire. He was at the helm of power. She said to Yazid, Yazid, not so fast. This is not the end of it. Was Sayyidah Zainab predicting what will happen? No. She was familiar with the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why she was so confident in her speech in the presence of Yazid. She spoke like a victor against a defeated imbecile. Number two, we as believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we as faithful individuals, as a faithful community, we need to adopt a more realistic view of life. Not from the prism of the current balance of power. Not through the military might of the countries involved in the war. Not through the weapons that they are using and supplying to kill innocent people. And not through the armies involved in crushing the people of Gaza. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, on the eve of Ashura, Shimr ibn al-Jawshan, the enemy of God who slaughtered Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, in a military maneuver to show his strength, in a display of power and strength, he came to the camp of Imam al-Hussein, to the tent of Imam al-Hussein, and he started rotating around the camp of the Imam. And he even tried to attack the camp. He didn't want to start the war, just to show that he's capable of attacking the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was very calm. He just recited one verse. He says, لا يغرنك تقلب الذين كفروا في البلاد. Do not be deceived by what you see. Yes, the Umayyads are powerful. They are running an entire empire that extends from North Africa to the middle of Asia. But do not be deceived by what you see. The real person managing everything is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is how Imam al-Hussein managed to stand his ground. We see things through the prism of God, justice, injustice, haqq, batil. And this is something that we learned from Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Even when you're alone and they stomp over your headless body with horses to crush you, you are more powerful than an entire dynasty, an entire empire. And you are the victor while they are the losers. When we have a realistic view of life, then we can decide freely where to stand. Others are not like us. The people that don't have Hussein are different. This is why we find even the people that decided to join the camp of the supporters of the people of Gaza, a lot of them joined when the movement gained momentum. Then they came. But for us, it was self-evident from the beginning. These people will not lose because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is against the oppressor. And when we say Allah, we mean everything will be against the oppressor. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will stand with the oppressed. This is why from the beginning, we sided with these people. Number 3, everything that is taking place in the world is part of a divine plan. Everything that is happening is part of a divine plan. Wallahu yaf'alu ma yasha. The Quran says, Allah will achieve His objectives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accomplish His goals. And His plans are based on calculations that are beyond our comprehension. We can't really understand how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is operating. This is why when some people said to the Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, not to go to Kufa, these people will not help you, these people will not support you. The Imam's answer was, Sha'Allah. He did not talk about his objectives, what he's trying to achieve. He said, Sha'Allah an yarani qatila. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes to see me slain in His way, because Imam al-Hussein couldn't even explain to the people the dimensions of his revolution. People back then couldn't understand what the Imam is embarking on and what will happen in the future. Till today, even though we can assess Imam al-Hussein's revolution better than the people in the past, but the story of Imam al-Hussein is still unfolding. Sha'Allah an yarani qadila. This wasn't just a struggle between two sides. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to change the course of history and to change the landscape of the world through Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And everything will serve the goals of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything will serve the mission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And usually God's missions are long-term missions. When we look at the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, we find that the beloved son of Jacob had to be separated from his father. Why? We don't know. But as a prophet of God, Yaqub never complained to anyone about this. He knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basing His actions on meticulous calculations. He knows what He is doing. And He's doing this for a reason. Otherwise, why would Allah separate Yusuf from Yaqub? And he cried for 40 years until they were reunited. The brothers are envious of him. They take him, they throw him in a well, in a barren land. The water of the well is not suitable for drinking. As Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says in Dua al-Arafah, he says, Ya muqayyid al-rakb li Yusuf. The caravan that came by and took out Yusuf wasn't supposed to come in that area, because the wells, the water in the wells in that area is salty, not suitable for drinking. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one directing them without them knowing. They went, they took him out. There are so many details in the story. The brothers were there. They said to themselves, he could divulge his identity and be reunited with his father. And if this happens, our father will punish us. So they quickly went and they told the caravan that this is a slave of ours. They took him, they said to Yusuf, if you reveal your true identity, we will kill you. We threw you in the well, we didn't kill you even though we intended to kill you initially, but if you reveal your identity next time, we will kill you. So they gave it to the caravan, they sold him to the caravan. And when you look at the ordeal, it's just so sad. But everything is going according to the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They take him to Egypt. The chief buys Yusuf. He becomes a slave in the house. And then you all know what happened between him and Zulaykha, and then they throw him in prison, and then he interprets the dream, and then he becomes the advisor to the king, and then he becomes the king of the kings. Wallah, tallah laqad atharak Allah alayna. Even though we enjoyed living in our comfort zones, the brothers of Yusuf were saying, but we were affected by the famine, and now we come here to beg from you to give us some food. And now we realize that you are our brother. لَقَدْ آثَرَكَ اللَّهُ. And this is a small example of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala operates. So, it's not about a conflict between two sides. And I'm not trying to compare between Gaza and Karbala. Oh no. There's no comparison whatsoever. لَا يَوْمَكَ يَوْمِكَ يَا أَبَا عَبْدِ اللَّهِ. Even the tragedy itself is more heart-wrenching than what we see happening in the world and in Gaza. لا يومك يومك يا أبا عبد الله. We can never compare between the two. But what I'm trying to say is that the story is not a conflict between two sides. Maybe one side can defeat the other. One side can, make scores, achievements from this war. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to achieve His goals. And victory and defeat should only be assessed through the prism of divine laws. They should be assessed differently. Even if they suffer, the people of Gaza suffer a defeat, a crushing defeat, this doesn't mean that they have lost the war. When Imam Zayn al-Abidin returned from Karbala, you all know the story. A man said to him, who won? You claim to be the progeny, the prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you. The Imam said to him, wait till you hear the adhan, then you will know who is the winner. The real winner is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in every story, in every war, in every conflict, in every event that takes place, the real winner is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I said, operates differently. He uses different weapons. He has different tactics that He employs. He has a different army. وَلَا يَعْلَمُ جُنُودُ رَبِّكَ إِلَّا هُ. And no one knows how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala operates. And we find through the story of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, God could have brought down His wrath on His enemies, but He didn't do this. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make Imam al-Hussein the victor in this war, victorious? Through lamentation, through tears, through the tears of Ruqayyah. We, the Shias today, have developed the spirit of defiance. The tears of Ruqayyah inspire millions of people, and we have become invincible. If we muster the Husseini strength within us, no one can defeat us. وَلَا يَعْلَمُ جُنُودُ رَبِّكَ إِلَّا هُ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala operates differently. وَلَا يُمْكِنُ الْفِرَارُ مِنْ حُكُومَتِكَ. We always say, we pray, I wish if God could intervene and crush the enemies. No. See, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need to rush to do anything. وَلَا يُمْكِنُ. No one can escape from the government of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the dominion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّمَا يَعْجَلُ مَنْ يَخَافُ الْفَوْتِ as we recite in the supplication. You know who rushes to do things? Who is scared of the window of opportunity to take revenge closes? إِنَّمَا يَعْجَلُ مَنْ يَخَافُ الْفَوْتِ. Someone that fears that he might miss the opportunity to do something. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not fearful of missing an opportunity. This is why Amir al-Mu'mineen says in a beautiful hadith in Nahj al-Balagha, he says, وَلَئِنْ أَمْهَلَ اللَّهُ الظَّالِمِ. When you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reprieving a criminal, postponing, punishing a criminal. Saddam was the ruler for 28 years. Harun was the ruler for 30 years. Muawiyah was the ruler for 40 years. Allah is not in a hurry. Why? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, لَإِنْ أَمْهَلَ اللَّهُ الظَّالِمِ. If he postpones the punishment, فَهُوَ لَهُ بِالْمِرْصَادِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is waiting for the oppressor. The oppressor is within shooting range of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The mirsad is a narrow valley in the mahshar on the day of judgment. The mirsad is when two mountains converge, forming a very small pathway for the travelers to go through when going from one place to the other through mountains. They have to go through this pathway. They have to. It's the only way to go to the other side of the mountain. So the Imam says Allah is waiting for the zalim over there. فَهُوَ لَهُ. The hadith says, continues to say, فَهُوَ لَهُ فِي مَجَازِ طَرِيقِهِ. As he is going through this very narrow pathway, God is waiting for him. وَبِمَوْضَعَ الشَّجَى مِن مَسَاغِرِيقِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like someone waiting in the esophagus, waiting for the food to be swallowed. This is how close Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to his enemies, to the oppressors. He has no fears of these oppressors escaping from his kingdom. But why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala postponing, punishing these oppressors throughout history? This is one of the policies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, sometimes he intervenes quickly. إِنَّ أَخْذَ رَبِّكَ لَشَدِيدٌ. Sometimes it happens quickly, but usually, no, he doesn't do it. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to awaken the nations. The Umayyads were ruling, and people were left in the dark. They were not aware of anything. Imam al-Hussein has to die in the most macabre manner. They kill him until his story spreads and the calamity sinks in people's hearts. That's when a revolution happens. That's when the entire dynasty of the Umayyads collapse, even though Muawiyah was trying to build an empire that would last for 1,000 years. But you see, the Muslim nation itself, they rose against Bani Umayyah. How can you kill the son of Rasulullah? Initially, they didn't have a clear view and a good understanding of what was happening. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gradually, slowly but surely, until the nations are awakened, this is when he takes revenge. Brothers and sisters, we now today live in an era where there is an incumbent civilization and a world order dominated by large corporations, driven by greed, hungry for power and money, and governments that are heavily influenced by interest-driven lobbies. And the people are just means to achieve these large corporations' goals. And these governments the countries that we live in, all the governments of the world, but especially the governments of this civilization, they have a lot of empty slogans, empty rhetoric. This war, brothers and sisters, is exposing the deeply rooted lies when you see complete disregard to the human lives. The Quran says when you disregard one life, it's like disregarding the life of the human race. If this is how they treat humans, whether it's in Gaza, in the East, in the West, this is how they view the people. Me and you, we're just consumers. We have no value in their eyes. And this is why this lie is being exposed because of the war. And sometimes when I see Western governments trying to put pressure to end the war, when they are supplying weapons to kill the oppressed, they try to wrap up the war so that people wouldn't wake up. This is their main fear. A tectonic shift is happening. A seismic change is taking place. And this will give rise to a new system. A system that will reinstate the divine values. Brothers and sisters, what makes this war unique, I know that we are currently witnessing a lot of wars in the world. But this war is unique because it divided the world. Nations are now divided. You have the supporters and you have the opponents of the war. You know what this does? The war is not confined to a small enclave in the Middle East. The battlefield expands. The hadith says that if a person is murdered in the East and a person in the West gives his approval to the murder of that person, the hadith says that that person is a partner in the death of that innocent man. The famous prophetic hadith says, "Man ahabba amala qawmin ushrika fi amalihim." If you give your approval to the actions of a group of people, the action of an individual, then you become a partner in that crime. Whether that's a good deed that they're carrying out or it's a crime that they are carrying out, you will become a partner. This is why this division, the supporters and the opponents, they are actively taking sides. The people that support the war, they are partners with the criminals killing these innocent people and these children. The war would expand and all these people are taking sides. Amir al-Mu'mineen, the battle of the camel. After the war, Amir al-Mu'mineen was victorious in the war. A man comes to the Imam and he says to him, "Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, my brother wished if he was today with us to witness the war and support you." The Imam says to him, "Your brother really desired to be with us today?" He said, "Absolutely." The Imam said that he was with us. He joined us. And then the Imam gave him an amount of money that was given to all the soldiers that took place. He said, "Give this money to your brother." Then he said to him, "Not only your brother joined us, there are people that are now in their mother's wombs. Generations that will come in the future were also with us in this war." And of course, on the other side, you have people that didn't witness the actual war, but they were there because they are against Amir al-Mu'mineen. When they hear the stories, they say, "I wish if we were on the other side." This is why this is a unique war. And this is why the situation is dangerous, because when people are taking sides, they will be subjected to the divine laws. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to punish, He has no fears. وَلَا يَخَافُ عُقْبَاهَا. And this is not a minor crime that is being committed against innocent lives. You have 15,000 children that have died already in this war. A single child. Amir al-Mu'mineen says that even if one person is killed by an entire army, I am allowed to kill all those people that took part in killing a single person. I have that authority invested in me by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what makes it dangerous, brothers and sisters. And also, the double standards applied. As we know, two wars are happening simultaneously. The war in Russia and the war in Gaza. You see that when the Russians attack a hospital and 13 people die, of course we condemn the killing of innocents wherever they may be, irrespective of their faith, their religion, their community. An innocent person should not be harmed, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran. But you find that when a hospital is attacked, and a hospital is occupied by patients, by sick people, you shouldn't attack a hospital. So this needs to be condemned. But when you see that a hospital is attacked in Gaza, where 600 people die, staggering 600 patients die in the hospital, or family members die, we need to investigate. We don't know who did this. This double standard that is applied shows that all these slogans are just tools to advance an agenda. There is no uniformity, there is no consistency. And that shows that these people don't believe in these principles that they ostensibly promote. When we look at Amir al-Mu'mineen's form of governance, we find the exact opposite. We find that the values during the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen prevailed. We find that Amir al-Mu'mineen applied the law on people who were very close to him, the same way he applied the law on people that were against him. One day, the treasurer in the government of Amir al-Mu'mineen gives a necklace to the daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Either it was Kulthum or Zainab, the beloved daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen. When the Imam sees the necklace worn by Lady Zainab, he said to Zainab, "Who gave you this necklace?" She said, "I went to Abi Rafi', the treasurer, and I took it from him, and I said to him that this is ariyatun madhmoona. If anything happens to it, I will give you the price of it." Amir al-Mu'mineen returned the necklace. And he said that if it wasn't for the fact that you had told him that this is ariya madhmoona, I would have punished you with the severest form of punishment. This means that Amir al-Mu'mineen is abiding by principles. And that's the biggest difference between the two systems of governance. Usually people, they are selective. When it comes to ideals, they are selective. When it serves my interest, then I want it. When it doesn't serve my interest, I'm against it. One day, two people come to see Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. They were sent by Uthman. They wanted to give him money. They said, Uthman says that this is his personal money. It's not taken from the Muslims, because Uthman was the caliph. Abu Dhar refused. Even though he's gaining from this, he's profiting. They're giving him 2,000 dinars. This is why we find that Amir al-Mu'mineen was very sensitive towards oppression. Amir al-Mu'mineen, the commander of the faithful, whom the Prophet had given him guarantees that he will be going to paradise, says in a hadith that if I was to be cut into pieces, is easier for me than meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment while I have oppressed a single human being. And the Imam says, to this extent, I would never even take the skin of a grain from the mouth of an ant. As you all know, this is a famous hadith. So we find that the system of government of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the system of governance, is totally different. Now, the question here is that what can justify the killing of 15,000 children? This is by far the greatest tragedy in modern times. And what adds salt to injury is the fact that people are indifferent towards this tragedy. If it was happening elsewhere, they would have reacted differently. People's apathy is outrageous. We, brothers and sisters, are witnessing the collapse of the moral system of this civilization. And as the former Prime Minister of Australia said, he said that if we don't abide by our values, our Christian values, then we have nothing to stand on. This will be the end of everything. Chaos will ensue, and this will be the modern Jahiliyyah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about. When we come to the people of Kufa, we find that the people of Kufa were oppressed. And they reached out to the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we reach out to Imam al-Mahdi, ajalallah ta'ala farajahu al-sharif. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a policy. Before supporting a group of people, an individual, He says, in tansurullah yansurkum. You support Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God will support you. وَيُثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَكُمْ. You will stand firm in defending Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in defending the ideals. You'll be able to resist all the pressures through divine backing and divine support. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam sends Muslim ibn Aqil. He represents me, and he is the best person that I can send to you. He's my confidant. I have full trust in this man. And by the way, Aqil had many children. 5 of his children married the daughters of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. And one of them was Muslim ibn Aqil, who was married to the sister of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Thiqati, Akhi, Ibn Ammi. He's my brother, he's my cousin, and my confidant. So he goes to the city of Kufa. Initially, they pledge their allegiance to him. 24,000 people give their allegiance to Muslim ibn Aqil. Then he sends a letter to Imam al-Hussein. Ya Aba Abdullah, these people gave their allegiance. They seem to be loyal to the cause. If you want to come to the Kufa, then the path is paved for you. But then Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad comes from Basra. He was the governor of Yazid in Basra. Yazid says to him that you need to bring order back in the city of Kufa. So he goes with only 50 people. While Muslim ibn Aqil had 25,000 people that had pledged their allegiance to him. But through scare tactics, through appealing to their greed, gradually he was able to influence the people of Kufa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, in the story of the Israelites, He says that Musa told the Israelites to enter the city, to enter the village. They said, إِنَّ فِيهَا قَوْمًا جَبَّارِينَ. No, the city is occupied by tyrants, huge human beings. They were very big. So 2 people that were acquainted with the divine laws, they said to them, if you enter the city, they will run away. They will escape, they will run away. But they refused. Had the people of Kufa, when Ubaydullah was with only 50 people, backed Muslim ibn Aqil, supported Muslim ibn Aqil, fought against his enemies, they would have won in this war. They would have received Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. The Imam could have reached the city of Kufa, and the Imam had written them a letter. He said, if you support me, my family is with your family, and I am with you guys. I will support you till the end. But unfortunately, they disappointed Muslim ibn Aqil, and they failed to support him. This was a major setback for them. This is called khidlan. When you fail to support the truth, what will happen? You will see other major setbacks. And this is what happened to the people of Kufa. Initially, they really wanted Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, but ultimately they ended up siding with the enemies of Imam al-Hussein, with the Umayyads, and taking part in shedding the blood of the son of Rasulullah, the grandson of Rasulullah, the son of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. So in tansurullah yansurkum. This is the policy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how we are being tested. You have to support the truth. Otherwise, you will find yourself on the other side, trying to crush the truth. Muslim ibn Aqil was in his hideout. The last day before hiding, he went to the mosque. He prayed, led the congregational prayer in the mosque of Kufa, with hundreds of people praying behind him. Historians say that the moment he finished his prayer, looked behind his back, there was no one with him. All alone. 24 or 25,000 people gave their allegiance, but they did not honor their pledge. So Muslim is now all alone in a city that was once run by his uncle Amir al-Mu'mineen. He's now a stranger in the city. Muslim al-Aqil could have escaped, but he wouldn't do this, because he was the one that came and asked the people to support Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and the Imam is coming. This is why he had to stay until he is killed. He goes into his hideout. Where is his hideout? His hideout is in the house of one of the tribal leaders of Kufa called Hani ibn Urwa. The people that have been to Kufa, they've been to his grave. I'm sure you visited his grave. An exceptional man. And by the way, Imam al-Hussein on the day of Ashura, after the killing of all his companions, he came to the battlefield and he started to call his companions one by one. The first name that he mentioned was Ya Muslim ibn Aqil, Ya Hani ibn Urwa, Ya Zuhair, Ya Habib, Ya Burayr, where are you? Most of them were in Karbala, but Muslim and Hani were in Kufa. As if Muslim and Hani were in Karbala, but they weren't. This is why we say that they are the first martyrs of Imam al-Hussein's movement. So he goes in his hideout in Hani ibn Urwa's house. Hani ibn Urwa, because he was a famous man, he pretends to be sick. And this was a plot. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, the governor, sends him a message that I want to come and visit you, because he's sick. This is a tradition, a norm in our culture. So Hani says to Muslim, I want you to hide behind the curtain. When this wicked man comes to visit me, when I give you the sign, when I make the gesture, you have the sword, prepare it, and storm inside the room, strike him with your sword and kill him. This will be the end of everything. And this could have ended everything, because Ubaydullah was the commander of the army against Imam al-Hussein. Umar ibn Sa'd was just a soldier in the army of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. So he comes to visit him. After a few minutes, Hani begins to recite a poem. He gave Muslim a gesture. Then he recited a poem because Muslim didn't show up, even though he knows Muslim is hiding behind the curtain and he has a sword. When he didn't show up, when he didn't come, he says, مَا الْإِنْتِظَارُ لِلَيْلَىٰ أَن تُحَيُّوهَا حَيُّوا سُلَيْمَا مَا الْإِنْتِظَارُ لِسَلْمَىٰ أَن تُحَيُّوهَا حَيُّوا سُلَيْمَا وَحَيُّوا مَنْ يُحَيِّيهَا. Come and greet my guest. Greet my guest. Muslim didn't show up. What happened? Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad sensed that there is a conspiracy brewing against him. So he quickly left Hani ibn Urwa. He left. Hani called Muslim. Ya Muslim, come. He's gone. Why didn't you do anything? Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, he's the head of the campaign against Hussein. He said, because of a principle that I abide by. I heard my uncle Amir al-Mu'mineen say that I heard the Prophet says, Al-Imanu qaydul fatk. If you're faithful, you wouldn't resort to deceit. That's not something a faithful individual would do. Even if it comes at the cost of losing an entire war that changed the course of history. Eventually, an informant told Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad that Muslim ibn Aqil is hiding in the house of Hani ibn Urwa. So Hani ibn Urwa is summoned, and Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad imprisons Hani and is now searching for Muslim ibn Aqil. Muslim ibn Aqil is now walking in the alleys of Kufa, not knowing where to go, until he stood by the house of a very noble woman. Stood there because he doesn't know where to go, and it was nighttime. The woman is waiting for her son to come. She opens the door only to see a stranger that she did not recognize. She says, may I help you? He said, I'm thirsty. She went inside, brought him a cup of water. He drank from the water. Went inside again, only to come out again to see Muslim standing. She said, Ya Abdullah, do you need anything? It's not appropriate for someone like you. You seem to be a pious man. It's not appropriate for someone like you to stand here. شافها وعين مستديرة أنا لا أهل عندي ولا عشيرة. While in a very shy way, he said, I don't have any family in this town. أنا مسلم الفاجد نصيرة غريبة وعمامي بغير ديرة. I have no supporters. I am Muslim ibn Aqil. The moment she heard the word Muslim ibn Aqil, she said, you are the nephew of Ali ibn Abi Talib. History tells us that the only supporter that Muslim had was this woman. And she has been immortalized. When you stand with the truth, when you stand with the oppressed, even though she couldn't physically help him, but because she gave refuge to Muslim ibn Aqil, every Muharram, every speaker has to mention her name. Especially during dark times when the oppressed people don't have any supporters. She was the only woman that supported him, and she's been immortalized. So she agrees to give him refuge. But she tells him that I have a son, and I don't think it would be good for my son to know that you are here. So he was hiding in one of the rooms in the house. Perhaps it was in the basement. Until the son comes. When the son comes, he realizes that the mother is going inside this room, taking food, taking water. So he says to her mother, who's inside the room? Do we have a guest? She refuses to tell him who's inside the house. And Ubaydullah had said, anyone that tells me about the whereabouts of Muslim will be given a prize. What is the prize? The prize is 1,000 golden dinars. Was it really worth it? 1,000 golden dinars and you go to hell for eternity for being responsible for the death of Muslim ibn Aqil. So he insists on his mother, who is it? Is it a man, a stranger in our house? She said, this is Muslim ibn Aqil. Muslim? Yes. But I ask you in the name of Allah not to tell anyone. Absolutely, I won't tell anyone. And he's thinking about going to tell Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad first thing in the morning, because it was at night. So first thing in the morning, with Fajr time, he goes to the palace of Ubaydullah. I want to see the Emir. Why? I have important information to tell him. So he sees Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad and he tells him that Muslim ibn Aqil is in our house. Moments later, they hear the sounds of horses gathering around the house of Taw'a, this noble lady. He tells her he didn't sleep at night. She says to him that I didn't see you rest. He said, because I saw my uncle Amir al-Mu'mineen tell me that you will be our guest tomorrow. So when he heard the horses approaching, he wouldn't let the horses raid the house of this noble woman. So he takes out his sword and he goes out. He is confronted by 200 armed men. They attack him. They ambush him from behind. And they used every sword, every weapon at their disposal to try and attack him. But he is a roaring lion. This is why Muhammad ibn al-Ash'ath, the commander of this contingent, the army, sends a messenger to Ubaydullah telling him to send more support. He said, I've given you 200 armed men to fight a single person. He said, do you think that this man is an ordinary man? This man is one of the swords of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He's so brave. Look at how he's fighting us. So he sends another contingent of men, 200 armed men, to support Muhammad ibn al-Ash'ath in their war against Muslim ibn Aqil, until they dig a hole in the ground. They resorted to deceit to arrest Muslim ibn Aqil. He falls inside that pit, and then they give him the aman. They say to him that you have security if you surrender. And then they arrest him. They take him to the palace. There was a man who was holding a cup of water. He said, can I have some water? He was very thirsty. He wants to drink from the water, but because he was injured, his lips were injured, the cup is filled with blood. So they give him another cup. Again, the cup is filled with blood. Then he says, as if I'm not supposed to quench my thirst. As if he wants to be like the companions of Imam al-Hussein. As if he was in Karbala when the companions of Imam al-Hussein all died thirsty. And he not only sympathized with Imam al-Hussein in not quenching his thirst, he was taken to the rooftop of Qasr al-Imara, the palace of governance in Kufa, and he was struck with a sword on his neck and thrown from the rooftop of the palace to the ground. رحم الله من نادى ومسلماه أيوا غريبا المقدر قضى وشاعت اخباره رموه القايم من قصر الاماره. So they severed his head, threw him from the palace, and then they dragged the body of Muslim ibn Aqil and Hani ibn Urwa in the streets of the city of Kufa. And then they crucified the two bodies that remained crucified on a tree for 3 days. While Imam al-Hussein, because of the letter of Muslim ibn Aqil, was proceeding towards Kufa. On the way he meets with 2 people that had come from Kufa. He asks him about what is happening in the city. They said, Ya Aba Abdullah, do you want us to tell you in secret or in public? We have bad news for you. Imam al-Hussein said, I wouldn't hide anything from my companions. They said, Ya Aba Abdullah, we left the city of Kufa when the two bodies of Muslim and Hani were being dragged in the alleyways of Kufa. The Imam cried bitterly, but then he went to the tent and he called the daughter of Muslim, Hamida. The Imam is her uncle. Hamida, come here, I want to talk to you. She was very young. The Imam embraces her. She sits in the lap of the Imam. Then the Imam does something to her that is only done to orphans. When he wipes his hand on her head, she said, Amma, araka tasna'u bi ma yusna'u bil yatama. Has something happened to my father? Are you trying to break the news to me? Imam al-Hussein told her that I am your father from now on, and my daughters are your sisters. Sukaina saw this scene on the day of Ashura. When the Imam was about to go to the battlefield, he said goodbye to everyone. They all came, they all said goodbye, except for Sukaina. The Imam says, Sukaina, where are you? He is told that she is sitting in the corner of the tent, refuses to come and say goodbye to her father. So the Imam comes, alights from the back of the horse, embraces her. She says, Abba, I saw you doing something to Hamida, my cousin. I know that in maybe few moments you will be killed. No one will treat me like an orphan. Can I sit on your lap? Can you wipe your hand on my head? So the Imam said, La tuhriqi qalbi. Oh daughter Sukaina, don't break my heart. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين. اللهم كن لوليك صلواتك عليه في هذه وفي كل وليا وقائدا ودليلا حتى تسكنه وتمتعه فيها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Please recite Surah Al-Fatiha after a loud salawat.